Music can be an integral part of the video game experience, tying memories to soundtracks, setting the scene for important moments, or just as ambient tracks to set the mood. Of the games I've experienced, I've always thought that the Final Fantasy games have excellent music. Because of that, we here at Project Mutt have decided to put every song in the mainline Final Fantasy games through an algorithm of our making to determine the best song in each Final Fantasy, and then we ranked each game by its best song. This is that objectively correct ranking. Hello world, my name is Atticus, and welcome to the experiment. There will, naturally, be spoilers for all of the Final Fantasy games, even the ones I haven't played. We'll start with number 15 and work our way up to number best. I'll start with the second best song, a few honorable mentions, and then reveal the best song in that entry before continuing on. And with that out of the way, let's get to it. I don't have much to say about our initial entry, Final Fantasy XI, because I've never played it. I owned a physical copy at one point, but I lacked the means at the time to actually play it. Our runner-up out of over 150 songs is Ragnarok, the theme from When You Fight Alexander, I believe. Our honorable mentions here are Hopelessness, Kazam, Veluganon Palace, Dusk and Dawn, Black Coffin, and Steel Sings Blades Dance. However, there can only be one best song, and while Ragnarok is a bop, the best song, according to our objectively true algorithm, is Conflict, You Want to Live Forever. And who doesn't? Me, but that's beside the point. Again, I don't have too much to say here, but it's a good song from one of the handful of Final Fantasy games I've not played. Up next is the next numbered title, Final Fantasy XII. Battle on the Big Bridge is our runner-up this time, another fun battle theme. I wonder if that'll be a trend. I have played Final Fantasy XII, but I've not beaten it. I went hard for a while, and I'm pretty sure I got near the end, but then I just stopped. It happens to the best of us. Final Fantasy XII has some excellent video game music. It lurks in the background and sets the tone. However, that also means that few tracks really stand out. They can't, after all, if they're to be atmospheric and, again, exist in the background. Our honorable mentions this time are Streets of Rabanastre, the Sky City of Bujaraba, the Salika Wood, and the Forgotten City, almost entirely zone music. The Best Song award goes to Giza Plains. This is the area music for a zone you explore fairly early on in Final Fantasy XII. After the opening, the main character wants to rob something from the Royal Palace, as it is being occupied by the Arcadian Empire, and Vaan, our main character, is not a fan of the Empire coming in and taking over. To get into the palace, however, he needs a sunstone, which can be obtained from a tribe of nomads on the Giza Plains. Fortunately, it's the dry season at the start of Vaan's adventure, and the nomads are present. Later, during the wet season, the nomads will move to some mountains, and the incessant rain will cause new paths to open up, as well as some old ones to close. The song is a bit intense for an early game area, but I think it works. Vaan is just beginning his adventure. Even if the plains aren't too far from home, I imagine he's still full of excitement for what going out to the plains means. He couldn't possibly know the scope of the adventure he's getting himself into, but to him, even taking an elixir from the Forbidden Chest is a strike at the Empire and a step in the right direction. Here we have another game which I own but have never played. I've actually got the DS version of Final Fantasy IV propped up next to my PSP edition of Final Fantasy Tactics, both systems which I still own but whose chargers are lost to me. Our runner-up is the main theme, and that makes sense. You want the main theme to be a good one. Some honorable mentions include Red Wings, Kingdom Baron, Theme of Love, Dancing Calcobrina, and Another Moon. I think Final Fantasy IV was the first to implement the time-honored tradition of going to the moon to fight the big bad. We saw it in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we're seeing it again with Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. Now that I think about it, for being such a Final Fantasy thing, I can't think of many other Final Fantasy games that actually do it. So kudos to Final Fantasy IV for being so iconic. The best song is Into the Darkness. Of all the Final Fantasy soundtracks, 4's is the one that most makes me want to talk about it, and what kind of events might accompany these fantastic tone-setting songs. Into the Darkness perfectly encapsulates that. I've never played the game. I have a bare-bones understanding of the plot, and yet this song conjures memories of a cutscene that almost certainly does not exist. It's incredible. The opening theme to Final Fantasy I is the sound of Final Fantasy. Just about every, if not all, future games incorporate this sound into at least one of their tracks, and I think 2 of them have songs titled Final Fantasy, which is just that game's rendition of this song. It came to a shock to me as well that this made only runner-up. I thought it was a shoo-in. Other excellent tracks, if not so iconic, include our honorable mentions: Town, Ship, The Floating Castle, Battle, Mid-Boss Battle, and Last Battle. The names aren't quite so evocative as 4's, but they get the job done nonetheless. Our best song for the original Final Fantasy, however, is Matoya's Cave. This song is far better than it has any right to be. Matoya's Cave plays a part as the center of 2 fetch quests. You need Matoya to brew a potion to wake a sleeping prince, but Matoya needs her crystal eye in order to do it, which involves going to Sun King, who directs you to collect a crown in a marsh and then rewards your efforts with attempted murder. I forget exactly how the events play out during gameplay, but all of those things do need to happen. But you don't mind, because you've got this excellent tune playing in the background whenever you visit Matoya, and then she kicks you out for being too ugly. Final Fantasy V is the first of these games, and in fact the only Final Fantasy which I've neither played nor owned. Sorry, Final Fantasy V. The runner-up here is The Prelude of Empty Skies. It sure does sound like a prelude. Not the prelude, mind you, but definitely a prelude. I'm not so sure those skies are empty, however. Our honorable mentions this time are Cursed Earth, Deception, The Fierce Battle, The Ancient Library, Critter Tripper Fritter, Beyond the Deep Blue Sea, The Land Unknown, and The Book of Ceilings. I'll mention at most 8 honorable mentions. Some of these games have close to 100 songs, and there are a lot of excellent songs in those soundtracks. To keep this from being me just reading out every song in every Final Fantasy, I feel I must place this limitation upon this list. But the best song is Battle with Gilgamesh, or Battle at the Big Bridge. I've heard it both ways. I can say with some degree of confidence that 5's story is the one I know the least about. The big bad is a tree, or something, and Gilgamesh gets tossed to a different reality, or something. I'm pretty sure all future incarnations of Gilgamesh are supposed to be the same Gilgamesh from 5, tying all Final Fantasies together in some form or another. We've made it to the top 10, and we're starting off with Final Fantasy XIV. Our runner-up is Hades' theme from the end of Shadowbringers, and I'm going to keep this section short because I can't speak over these lyrics. Our honorable mentions are Academia Annihilator, To the Edge, Sins of the Father, Sins of the Son, the Tempest theme, Gates of the Moon, The Burn, The Seven Jesters, and High Treason. But the best song is Eternal Wind. Just kidding. I removed songs that were from other Final Fantasies, just those tunes revamped for 14. We love a series-wide leitmotif, but it feels strange if the best song in this game was just a song from a different game. The actual best song goes to the Yansha Day theme, or A Father's Pride. I can't quite place it, but something just hits different listening to A Father's Pride. It's not nostalgia, but it's something. For a time, I'd fly around, listen to this track play, and then I remembered about the internet. And as long as we're keeping track of which Final Fantasies I've played and or beaten, I have played 14, but I've not beaten it. I'm somewhere in late 5.3 though, so I could probably be caught up to the story by the time this episode goes up. But 14 is an MMO, and you don't really beat an MMO. Also, did you know that the 14 free trial goes up to level 60 and includes all... I'll be honest, I didn't expect Final Fantasy II to place so high. I've technically played this one, but while I got up to the final boss in the first Final Fantasy, I did approximately one fight in the second. The thought process was I'd beat 1 and then move on to 2, but I never did beat 1. Our runner-up is the Rebel Army theme. This seems to me to be the quintessential Final Fantasy II sound, but another track scored best. Our honorable mention this time goes to the main theme, and our best song is Magician's Tower. Say what you will about the game's leveling system, I'm going to play it just to experience this song as intended. This is an absolute bop. It plays in the Mysidian Tower, a dungeon that rivals the final in terms of length, and has some excellent theming. The tower houses and contains the most powerful magic, Ultima. Every floor leading up to this ultimate spell is themed after an aspect of magic, and the top floor is just one big room with the sealed spell. There's a wonderful unity of design, and the music just pushes that over the top. We've made it halfway through the list where we find Final Fantasy VIII and the runner-up track, The Extreme. I've played most of 8. I got stuck at the start of the 4th disc, I believe. There was a tough boss fight and no random encounters I could find to grind those levels. This is the final boss theme playing, and it is fittingly intense, with an element of hope. Much hangs in the balance, but all is not yet lost. Our honorable mentions this time are Liberi Fatali, Blue Fields, Waltz for the Moon, The Man with the Machine Gun, Julia, Succession of Witches, Lunatic Pandora, and maybe I'm a Lion. I wish I could talk a bit about a few of those tracks. They do a good job of having an alien sound, but unfortunately they did not nab the title of Best Track. Instead, that goes to Balamb Garden. 8 has such a wild story. I once posited to a friend that eventually any story will be reducible to some combination of Final Fantasy plot points. Not necessarily because they are so widely applicable, but because they grab every corner case they can. I couldn't tell you what 8's story is. I know the plot beats, but so much of it is just so strange, and I love it for that. But I can understand why others might not. Even in that cacophony of the bizarre, there is a place that feels like home, Balamb Garden, and this song goes a long way to sell that feeling. Bottom of the best, we've got 13 with runner-up Blinded by Light. The main problem with determining the best songs in Final Fantasy XIII is that the developers knew which song was the best, and it appears in just about all of the good songs. Blinded by Light, from what I can tell, was spared and allowed its own identity. I didn't beat 13, but I did play every game in the trilogy. I don't think I got terribly far in the original game, however, I did beat the second one. And I got to the last day in the last one. I don't know what that says about me as a person. While I don't remember much of 13-2, I don't remember ever feeling particularly lost despite not playing the first one all the way through, and I don't think I really looked up the story. Our honorable mentions are Saz's theme and all the best song iterations, the top of which is the Sunlith Waterscape, meaning the best song is, of course, The Promise. This was by no means planned, but I do so enjoy how at the middle here we have what I think are widely regarded as the worst Final Fantasies. 2 has that for gameplay reasons, 8 for its story, and 13 for the linearity early on. I think 15 is also widely disparaged, but I am not as familiar with that discourse. The Promise is an excellent song and is found throughout the game, and again, we love a leitmotif. The Promise gets top spot for being the original and the purest form of this melodic idea. Speaking of 15, that takes the next spot with runner-up song Unsettling Aura. The song lives up to its title and does in fact convey an unsettling aura. I've beaten 15, but I can't place where the song appears out of memory, and a quick Google search only gave me the soundtrack information, so I'm not sure exactly where this appears, but it's not difficult to imagine the kind of scenario where this might play, and it works quite well there. Our honorable mentions are Veiled in Black, Disquiet, and Noctis, and the best song is Valse di Fantastica, and it sure is a fantastic waltz. This is the song that got me excited for Final Fantasy XV. We've done about 10 of these now, so I'm just going to bask in the song for a bit, but I do want to mention that there are 4 different Noctis themes, and I just want you to know that. We're at the top 5, and if this weren't an objectively correct listing, the ordering could change with the time of day. In a sea of excellent music, we have Final Fantasy VII and runner-up The Forested Temple. 7 is the other Final Fantasy I beat, and boy, did that feel like an achievement. Still does. I had a guidebook at the time, but the win still counts. I went with the original Final Fantasy VII soundtrack instead of the remakes. I don't know how much that would have changed, but I figured the remake is an addition to 7's universe and story, rather than an update. So as with all the other games that got sequels and spin-offs, I focused solely on the original game. The honorable mentions go to the opening theme Bombing Mission, Turk's theme, Underneath the Rotting Pizza, main theme, the Gold Saucer, Aerith's theme, and the second best boss theme in the game. I do want to take a second and appreciate Square's commitment to the bit in respect to Midgar and its being a pizza. One day, I will make a video about it. The best song, of course, goes to the best boss theme, Jenova. One Winged Angel is the second best, for those wondering. While One Winged Angel is certainly more iconic, we're after the best songs, not the most iconic ones. And Jenova is an absolute bop. Just listen to that battle theme. I don't know what it sounds like to fight a parasitic alien lifeform whose sun is bent on destroying the world, but I bet it sounds like this. There are 3 distinct songs in Final Fantasy VI that I could have sworn were in 7. I've thought about it, and I think LimeWire is to blame. LimeWire, for those who may not know, was a virus that let you download songs for free. I know I had a few CDs with Final Fantasy music downloaded from LimeWire, and I think there were 3 Final Fantasy VI songs on it. This runner-up, The Phantom Forest, included. As I am wont to do, I then forgot about it, but remembered the songs because 6 has some amazing music. When I would think of these songs, I guess I just assumed they were from 7 because I knew they were from Final Fantasy, and 7 was the one I was most familiar with. Honorable mentions for 6 are Opening Theme, The Mines of Narshe, Kefka, Phantom Train, New Continent, and Fierce Battle. The best song is, beyond a doubt, Dancing Mad. I'm going to try and make this video at least as long as Dancing Mad, because it's a behemoth of a song sitting at an alarming 17 minutes and 40 seconds of runtime. And it is so good for all of it. I believe that Nobuo Uematsu, the composer for a lot of Final Fantasy songs, has stated that he is most proud of Dancing Mad, and it's not hard to hear why. If you have 18 minutes, or however long it takes to play through the entirety of Final Fantasy VI, I would recommend giving it a listen. I haven't beaten Final Fantasy VI myself, so I can't speak to how it compares in the best overall Final Fantasy game discussion, but even from the bit I played of the early game, I could tell it was incredible. Coming in at number 3, we have the game with the best overall soundtrack. Unfortunately, this list only compares the single best song. Final Fantasy IX's runner-up is Vamos a la Flamenco, a song that speaks for itself. 9 is another Final Fantasy which I've played the majority of, but never actually beat. It was quite difficult to pick just 8 honorable mentions, but here they are. A Place to Call Home, Danger in the Forest, Freya's theme, Pooja's theme, Loss of Me, Crystal World, Final Battle, and Vivi's theme. I just noticed that's 3 different character themes. That's impressive. The title of Best Song in Final Fantasy IX goes to You're Not Alone. This plays at such a powerful moment in the game. Spoilers ahead if you plan to play Final Fantasy IX. Zidane's quote that shows during the title screen idle cinematic is, "You don't need a reason to help someone." And he lives by those words throughout the game, supporting and aiding his comrades with every problem they face, from Vivi's existential dread to Steiner and Beatrix's growing realization that what they're fighting for is wrong. But when the time comes that Zidane himself needs help, he turns his friends away, determined to fix things on his own. But through their persistence and showing that they are there for him just as much as he has been there for them, the gang is able to regroup and face the final challenges. That's a highly distilled version, but that's the gist of it. This is an emotionally charged song for anyone that has experienced up to this part of the story, and it is so good. The runner-up to Final Fantasy game with the best song is Final Fantasy X, and the runner-up to its best song is Someday the Dream Will End. Much like 8 and 9, I've gotten rather far in this game, but I never beat it. Yunalesca, I want to say, is the boss I got stuck at. Another emotionally powerful song, Someday the Dream Will End, really encapsulates the feel of 10's story to me. Everyone has to wake up eventually, and that's even more true when you're a ghost or something. 10 isn't as bad as 8 in the weird story elements department, but that's one that trips me up. Again, spoilers, but like half the cast, including a non-insubstantial number of the party, are dead for the entirety of the game. They make it make sense in the lore though, which is impressive. It's just been a bit since I played. The honorable mentions are to Zanarkand, Daughter of the Great Summoner, Auron's theme, Suteki Dane, Wandering Flame, Otherworld, Thunder Plains, and Cloister of Trials. And the best song goes to Besaid Island. This song feels like home to me, and I'll make a whole video on that, don't you worry. At this point in the story, Tidus has been swallowed by the incarnation of sin, thrust into a world of which he knows nothing, including, but not limited to, the language of a major group, and had to fight some giant fish monster, I believe. He washes up on the shores of Besaid Island and meets Wakka, and now his adventure is ready to begin. At this point in the story, we are far from the ordinary world, but we've managed to find a safe haven, some friends, and a purpose to our existence here. We've finally made it to the best Final Fantasy as determined by their best song, and it's Final Fantasy III. The runner-up is Eternal Wind, hands down the best overworld theme in the franchise, and quite possibly in general. I've not beaten 3, but I did play a fair bit of it on the DS. 3 introduced the job system to Final Fantasy and is, overall, an enjoyable adventure. In other rankings, I don't know if it takes the top spot, but it wins with Eternal Wind alone here. But there's an even better song on the DS remake, whose music I use because it was an update, unlike 7's remake. The honorable mentions are Into the Crystal Cave, Tower of Owen, Pavilion of Dorga and Un, and Last Battle 3. The best song in all of Final Fantasy goes to Zephyr Memories, or Memory of the Wind, Legend of the Eternal Wind. I'm gonna call it Zephyr Memories for brevity's sake. And this makes sense to me. As a kid, with 3 on the DS, I'd watch the opening cinematic over and over just to listen to this song. This was either before the internet, or I just never thought to utilize it. I couldn't tell you which. As an opening cinematic, this track doesn't have the backing of an emotional cutscene or a frantic battle to save the world and it's still the best song, which should say more than I ever could about the quality of this track. This has been our objectively correct ranking of the best songs in Final Fantasy. If you disagree, you're wrong. Sorry. But feel free to leave what you think the best song in a given game is or what deserves the top spot. And with that, I have been Atticus, and thank you for participating.